use for my confetti soap, not surprisingly, is some confetti. Now, there's several ways that you can do this. Some people use all the trimmings and that from their old bars. In the UK, we can't do that. We're not allowed to mix varieties of soap together. So therefore, we have to have a soap that's already assessed for a recipe to then shred up to put in the same recipe to make the confetti. So a little bit more of stricter rules here in the UK. So what I will typically do is, maybe if I'm making a big batch of something, I may make it larger than I need, so I've got some spare that I can shred up, or I will separately just make some soap to turn into confetti, to put into the confetti soap. So, as I said, a little bit more of a pain over here. We can't use it as a way of using up scraps. Now, the other thing with my confetti soaps is when I do my soaps and I'm going to shred them up, I don't like big old long shreds. I don't like it, you know, when you see confetti soap and it's got long strands of confetti, you know, going across. So I like my shreds to be quite short. Now, you can do that by putting a bar in a grater or making sure you grate on the short side of the soap. I just find it easier to take whatever it is I'm shredding and chop it all up, first of all. Okay, then I use one of these sort of rotary grater things. Doing it with one of those hand rubby up and down ones, I just find it's just too much like hard work. I'm sure some people use power graters. Be careful with that, because obviously your soap can be quite hard. Now, if I've made my confetti soaps as a base, I do tend to leave them out curing for at least a week or so. I don't necessarily let them get to a full cure if I'm just going to shred them up, because that way as well, you know, they're going to be a little bit more adherent in the new soap. But yeah, I do want them so they're nice and firm. And the key thing is, can you see here that they're shredding nicely, but my shreds are staying apart? If you start shredding stuff up too early, you're sort of almost like shredding soap dough. Okay, so we're just going to go through and shred that. Now, I'm sure you don't want to see me shredding up a whole ton of soap, so I'm going to carry on with this, and I will come back when I've got all my lovely shreds. Okay, so I've done my shredding. Here's all my sort of goldy colour shreds. This is a honey wash soap, so that's why they're goldy. And then I've got this soap, which was a yellow soap. Still obviously the same fragrance from the same batch as those. I had a yellow and I put a tiny bit of black swirl in it. So I've sort of got yellow and black to represent the bees. And as you can see here, can you see how nice and short my shreds are? And also they're at the point where if I squeeze them together quite hard, they would squish together a bit like soap dough, but they're at that dry enough stage where they are moving apart from each other and not clumping. So that's ideal. So yeah, don't make a bar of soap then expect to be able to shred it up the next day. But as I said, if you're using old soaps, then that's great. Another thing I would advise is if you are using older soaps, that's absolutely fine. And that's often what people do. They get a soap, it's not selling or something, or those scraps off the edges. When you do use those, do make sure that after you've shredded them up, either use them pretty soon or keep them covered, keep them wrapped, put them in a bag or something, so that you don't want every tiny weeny little shred to dry out and be really hard. You want the fact that you've exposed that sort of moister area to work in your favour. Okay, so we're going to use these straight away now we shred them up. If your shreds were really sticky, imagine you were trying to grate them and they kept sticking together, I would probably stop and wait, or persist in the grating but then spread them out a little bit and just let them dry off a little bit, because you don't want these shreds clumping together in a big lump in the soap, because that would just be a pain and your soap wouldn't work properly. Now, how many shreds do I use? That looks like a huge amount, doesn't it? For me, I typically go to a maximum of about 50% soap shreds, okay, the entire shred, the soap or whatever you're going to munch up, about that will be about 50% of my oil weight. Okay, I might go a little bit over. Certainly going under is easy. Under is fine. I find a 50% or around there, I'll quite often go a little bit over that. But if you start to go too much more over that, then it can be very difficult to get everything to mix thoroughly in and make sure they're all covered in soap and get your soap to join together successfully. Okay, so I weighed these before I munched them all up. I'm now just going to reweigh and see how much shred of each colour that I've got. Let's now have a look at some calculations. One thing that I get asked probably more than anything is whenever I do a soap with an embed in or with anything like that, people ask me how I work out how much soap I need. And it's going to be the same for a confetti soap. And I always think with something like a confetti soap, it's potentially even more important because often we're doing a confetti soap to try and use up some scraps. So we don't want to end up with a load of excess stuff when our purpose is to use up excess things we've got hanging around. Okay, so let's have a look at some calculations that I would do. Now, excuse the writing on the screen. I've got a new tablet thing, remote tablet for my computer, and it's a bit tricky to write on. I'm not quite used to it yet, so it looks like my writing's a bit like a 3-year-old, so just bear with me. So I've got my shred, and I've just weighed it, and with my gold shred, I've got 1,083 grams. And with my yellow shred, I've got 477 grams. Now that is the soap weight. It's the actual shredded soap. Now, when I make my soap, and what you would do in anything that you're doing like this, is you'd say, okay, how many oils, how much oil do I normally use to fill this mould up? So for my soap, my normal oils in total for these cubes that I make is 2,875 grams of oil. Now, what I can't do, and a mistake that a lot of people make, is they take these figures here and they take them off the oil figure. If you do that, you're going to end up with a soap being too short, because what you're doing is you're comparing soap. So therefore you're taking off oil and lye and water and fragrance, the volume of all of that, you're taking that away from your oil figure. So you're taking too much away. So what we need to do is we need to turn these shreds into the oil that those shreds contain. And how we do that is we do it by multiplying the shred weight by the percentage of oils in your recipe. Now, if you don't know the percentage of oils in your recipe, I'll go over it quickly in a minute. For those of you that do or don't care, fast forward through this bit. But for me, for my recipe, let's just deal with this first of all. My oil is 69% of my recipe. So what you do is you say my gold shred is 1083. If I times that by 69%, okay, so just pop that into your calculator, 1083 times 0.69 or something. That tells me the oil in there is 747. And I do the same for the yellow. 477 times 69% or times 0.69. It's the same thing, isn't it? That tells me my oils in there are 329. So I now know my total oils that I've got. So if I add those up, I can see that in that shred, the total oil comes to 1,076 grams. So now, when I'm making my soap, I want to reduce the oil that I'm going to make up by this amount, because this is the oil that I've already got chopped up in my containers. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to say, right, I would normally put 2,875 grams of oil in. Let's take off this 1,076. And that will now tell me how much I need for my soap. So if we take that off, that now tells us the new oils that we need are 1,700 199 grams. Now, if you were doing just a basic recipe, a basic soap, and you're just bunging all your confetti or an embed or whatever into one thing with just one layer and everything, that's all you need to do. Just now make up your soap using those oils, 1799. Yeah, and that will give you a soap the same size as you would have had if you didn't have any shred in it. What we need to do with ours is just say, okay, I'm going to complicate it a little bit more because I want to do 2 layers. I want the gold shred in one layer and the yellow shred in another layer. So what I need to now do is I need to take the oils that we've just calculated, this 1799, and I want to divide it, split it up between these 2 amounts of shred, because I want to have more oils with the big bit of shred and less oils with a small bit of shred. So I'm going to have a thin layer and a fat layer. That's what I want. I don't want it an even soap. Now, the easiest way to do that is just work out a percentage. So if we look at these, now, whether you do it on the percentage of the shred or the percentage of the oils, it doesn't matter. Let's do a percentage, a nice basic percentage. So to do a percentage, we're going to say, if I compare the 747 with the total amount of oils in that soap, 1076, excellent writing there, times that by 100, that gives me 69% there. Let's do the same for the other one. That gives me 31%. Now, you could have, if you wanted to, you could have said once you got the 69%, you could have just taken that away from 100 to get this as the balancing figure. I like to work them both out separately because that way, if I've worked them both out, I can now do a little check and just make sure that they do add up to 100, and I know that's right. And so I know how I want to do my layers, and once I've got these figures, it's really easy for splitting everything else out. So if we think about splitting everything out, I want my oils. So let's say in layer 1, that's going to be my layer where I use my gold shred. My total oils, let's go back to the blue for those. Remember they're this 1799 figure. So I want 1799 and I want 69% of those in layer 1, and then for layer 2 the same 1799, but I want 31% of the oils. Okay, so you can just now work that out. So you can see for layer 1, I want 1,241 grams of my oil, and layer 2, I want 588 grams of my oil. We can just do that little check again, can't we? I always like to check when I've calculated 2 figures. Let's just add them together. That comes to 1799, which is exactly what we wanted, wasn't it? That was our figure here to agree to the figure here. So we're happy that we've split our oils up properly, and that's a good check because quite often you see people having a layered soap where it's lye heavy in one bit and it didn't set up in the other because they've done their split wrong. Okay, so now we know how to split up our oils. You would do exactly the same for your lye solution. So what you need to do is obviously work out how much lye you need, and you would do that by putting that 1799. Know the oils we're going to use, the ones in the green blob here? You're using that many oils. Put that into your lye calculator and calculate how much lye to make up. Once you've done that, weigh the lye solution. Okay? Then you'll know how much lye solution that you've actually got. And then you just do these calculations again. But instead of using the 1799, you do your lye solution. So let's imagine, let's just roughly make up a figure. I'm just going to purely make it up. Let's say we had 400 grams of lye in total. You just do 400 times 69% for your first layer, and then 400 times 31% for your second layer. Okay, and you would just work those figures out. I'm not going to worry about doing here, and that would tell you how much lye to have in each of those layers, and that's all your calculations done. Okay, so that's how we work out how to get a correctly filled mould when we've got an embed. That would work with embeds. You would just weigh your embed and do the same thing. Remember, shreds are just micro embeds. That's all they are. Okay, so there's how we fill our mould up correctly. What I'll just now quickly go over, so jump over it if you already know how to do it, is how do you work out that percentage of oils? You know, if you didn't know how to get this to this because you didn't know the percentage of oils in your recipe, that's what I'll just quickly go over in the next bit. So let's have a look at our recipe now. So obviously this would be your recipe that you would put into Soap Calc, and hopefully you're used to this format if this is something that you use. Now what we want is we want to compare our oil figure, which is this 1000 over here. I'm using grams. Obviously if you normally use pounds or ounces, then you pick those figures up. And we need to compare that with the total weight of our soap, which is this figure here. Okay, and again, you just being consistent with your pounds or ounces, and just work out a percentage. It's just a normal percentage calculation. So you take your 1000, which is the oils, divide it by the 1455, which is the total. I'm not going to bother with the 0.08, it's not going to make any difference. Times that all by 100. And when you work that out, that will give you the percentage of oils in your recipe. So that tells us that that is 68.7%. Okay, so close enough to 69%, isn't it? So if you use that recipe regularly, that's always your percentage of oils in that recipe. You'd only have to recalculate it again if you need or if you choose to change your recipe. So we now know that we've basically got 69% of oils in our recipe. And for our purposes, that tells us that those shreds were made with 69% of oils. Now, in my first layer, I'm going to have black gold from Mica Mama. I'm doing it all a single colour, so let's just weigh out the amount that I need. Okay, so I'm just adding that straight to my oils because it's going to be a single colour, this part of the soap. Okay, so there's our oils blended in. This is my lye solution and my sodium lactate, so let's get that in. Now, as I said, I'm doing mine in 2 layers because I want one layer to set up nicely first so I get nice flat layers. You could do your whole soap together if you wanted to. Okay, let's get our fragrance oil for this layer. Okay, so I'm using, as I said, honey wash, and my honey wash comes from Grace Fruit in the UK. Okay, now what I'm going to do with these is, because you see, I've actually got a lot of shreds compared to my oils. That's why you really don't want to go over having 50% too, well, certainly not too high. So we need to get these mixed in. Now you could add your shred to your soap or your soap to your shreds. I just put them into whichever is the biggest container. Okay, so as you can see here, this looks like a lot of shred, doesn't it? But it'll be fine. Okay, obviously if you use less shred than this, it is easier to do. You know, I'm really sort of at the limit here with mine. And now because mine is all chopped up nice and small, I don't need to go back in with my stick blender. If you'd done longer shreds, you could at this stage go back in with your stick blender to chop them all up. But obviously that can get really quite boggy and quite difficult around the blade of your blender. Okay, let's just get those in the mould. Okay, I'm working nice and quickly because I want this layer to be as flat as it possibly can, considering how much shred is in there. You know, that's going to stop it flowing really flat. Okay, let's get that. Make sure you're pushing it right into those corners. And again, if you've used less shred, it will flow into your corners a little bit better. So I'm just working this as quickly as I can, and then I'm going to bang it down to try and get it as level as possible before it starts setting up. Okay, so there's a lot of shred in there. Okay, so I've given that a good tap down, and that's pretty nice and level. A couple of little bits sticking up there, not too worried. I think that's going to be fine. Okay, if you leave it to get any thicker than that, you could have trouble getting it level. If you don't want it level, that's fine too. So I'm going to now leave that to set up for a little while. It won't take too long, and then I'll make up the next layer and just repeat.
What's it like to be the one that he turns to when he's out of answers? What's it like to be the one that he comes to when he wants to dance? And I wonder what's that like? I have got him on my mind, but he doesn't know my name, and I'm running out of time. I wish you felt the same, and I'm acting stupid like every day. Don't know what to do or what I should say, 'cause I've got him on my mind, but he doesn't know my name. What's it like to hold his hand when he tells you that you're all he wants? And it's midnight, oh, I'm thinking about him. I have got him on my mind.
Okay, here we are the next day with our nice slab of honey wash soap. It does smell lovely. Right, the first thing I'm going to do is I need to cut this into 5cm cubes. Now this slab is actually slightly larger all the way round, and that's fine, so I'll get to trim some off the edge of each. And that's good because can you see here? Now, if I was going to do a loaf of soap and I just want to slice the bars right up to the edge, what I would do is I would get some scrap soap, you know, like when you bevel off the edges, and I would just go in and fill those little holes in with that. The reason they were caused was because of how thick the soap was when it went in the mould, just pushing it up against the edges. There'll be none of that on the inside, it's just a tiny bit on the outside. So what I want to do first of all is I'm just going to trim this and take a slice off. I've got this on the lowest setting of my Custom Craft Tools cutter. So let's get this an angle I can actually push it through. Okay, so I can just adjust this to give me my 5 centimetres. And let's just slice through and get those 5 centimetre slices. One. And my last one, which we're just leaving with my final little spare bit on the top. Now this spare bit on the top gives me quite a nice healthy little chunk. So what I tend to do is this will be chopped up and make brilliant size samples. The skinny bits that I chop off, I hate giving, hate's probably a bit of a strong word. I don't like giving really skinny samples that are just going to fall apart really quickly. So these I scrunch up and I make sort of pucks of soap, little guest type soaps. Okay, so there's my cut into mini loaves. And now all I want to do for each of these, if we have a look, these are slightly longer than I need them. I want 25 centimetres, and you can see I've got a little bit extra on each one. So I do like to have the ends trimmed off. So what I do for each one is, again, I'm just going to go down, and before I put my little marker on, my little guide on, I'm just going to chop a little edge off each one, just like you would do with a normal loaf of soap. I only bother doing it on one end because as I cut the 5 centimetre bars, it'll automatically trim the other end. Now again, if you were making a confetti soap to use up scraps, you're probably not going to be making a soap that you want to a particular, you know, for me, I'm deliberately making these because I want 5 centimetre cubes. But if this was a loaf of soap, I wouldn't be trimming all these extra bits off. Because remember what we said about getting the right amount of stuff in the mould? You don't want to end up with lots of extra bits. But mine is not a use it up type soap. Oops. The Custom Craft Tools Caterpillar does come with a ruler that you can have in here to measure your cuts. I don't like that because I find it difficult to always, you know, eyeball a soap, and, you know, when you've got a mark up here to get it in a line exactly with where it is and get it millimetre perfect. So I just made myself a handy little sort of slot-on guide here. I did have to drill a hole in my caterpillar, but I think it's worth it because I've got my little guide on here now. Okay, so I can now just push this to where I want it. I'm just going to check where that, yep, exactly where it's going to be, which is cool. And now I'm ready to go. Okay, so now I haven't got to measure each one. I'm going to make sure I start from that cut end, because remember that was the other end that I hadn't quite yet trimmed. Okay, now I can just chop my little 5 centimetre cubes. So there we are with our cute little cubes. That lovely, nice colouring has come out, isn't it? I'm really pleased with that colouring for the honey wash soap. And then all I will do to finish them off is I will go around and bevel all the edges, and then I do just stamp them with my logo. So just finish off, as you can see, just with my little cubes. So I will just bevel those off those corners. I'm not going to do any final photos because I'm just going to like these little cubes. There we are. I hope you found this video useful. I hope it helped you with your calculations when you're putting embeds or shreds or whatever into your soap to make sure you get the amount that you need to make the soap that you want to make without having extras and wastage. Do remember with mine, I put what I would consider the maximum amount of shred into a soap. So I think about 50% of the actual shred weight compared to your oil weight. I was a little bit over here, is sort of maximum. I really think if you go over that, it's going to be very difficult to get it into the mould successfully. But certainly going under gives you a more fluid soap and allows you to pour a little bit better. Thanks for watching everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, it'd be great if you gave me a thumbs up. And why not consider, if you haven't already done so, subscribing to my channel. Have a good rest of your day everyone. Happy soaping.